Hello, my name is Daniel Kochis. I'm policy analyst in European affairs at the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Welcome to our discussion today on U.S.-Romanian public opinion, which focuses really on many of the key issues which face the two nations and those which face our friendship. We are so fortunate today to be joined by Romania's ambassador to the United States, George Christian Maior, and by Brett Lloyd of the Polling Company. By way of introduction, Ambassador Maior was appointed Romanian ambassador to the U.S. in June 2015 and commenced your post on September 17, 2015. Between 1992 and 1997, you served as a diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with Department of Treaties and Department of Strategic Affairs. Between 1997 and 1999, you were chargé d'affaires at the Romanian Embassy in Dublin, Ireland. You served between 2000 and 2004 as State Secretary and head of the Department for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Defense Policy within the Ministry of National Defense. In that capacity, you were responsible for coordinating the strategic and military dimensions of Romania's NATO accession process, so extremely important role. In November 2004, you were elected senator in Romanian Parliament, where you held various positions, including chairman of the Committee of Defense, Public Order and National Security, a member of the Joint Committee for Parliamentary Oversight on the Foreign Intelligence Services activity, and a member of the Senate Committee for Human Rights and Minorities. Following your nomination by the President of Romania, you were appointed the fourth director of the Romanian Intelligence Services in October of 2006. You received your LLM in International Comparative Law at the George Washington University in 1992. You also, in 1997, were conferred a PhD in International Law from your university, Cluj-Napoca, and your PhD dissertation was on national and European features in Strasbourg European Court jurisprudence, which you were nominated for the UNESCO Most Prize in 1998. So thank you so much for joining us today. And would also be remiss if we didn't introduce Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Brett Lloyd is president and CEO of the Polling Company, a privately held corporation currently in its 23rd year of operation, which helped conduct the survey data, which we're going to be discussing this afternoon. Mr. Lloyd has served as a strategy analyst, polling director, and outside advisor for a multitude of congressional, senatorial, and gubernatorial candidates, national political committees, and for the 2008, 2012, and 2016 presidential campaigns. Most recently, Mr. Lloyd, you served as a pollster for the Trump-Pence presidential campaign, and I believe called that correctly, one of the few who did so. You've also served as a lecturer and consultant for universities and international government relations firms, developing, implementing, and teaching public policy to students, professors, and diplomatic staff representing over 90 countries. And you're a graduate of Iowa State University and the University of Northern Iowa. So thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us today, and thank you to our audience for joining us as well. Extremely important topic, and so I think perhaps to frame the discussion today, if I would ask maybe Mr. Lloyd to start off, if you can discuss briefly with us the polling that was undertaken, such as those took part, when the surveys were conducted, and then maybe I'm going to ask Mr. Ambassador if you could give us a top line of what you see this survey data representing.
Sure. So together, Ambassador Maior and myself, and InScope, which is a strategy consulting polling statistics company out of Romania, we had worked together in trying to develop some kind of branding and intelligence where we would be able to bring essentially data on two groups of citizens together. What we wanted to do is we wanted to ask similar questions in Romania as we asked in the United States of residents of both countries, and really find out what we had in common, and really wanted to find out the differences that we had with the citizens. Surprisingly, not too many, but it was really interesting. And what it's really been able to do in my mind is it's been able to kind of brand Romania. As an American who was being asked in drafting some of these questions, we were looking at Romania and we were asking these questions of, do what we see in America, do some of the issues that we see, do they translate abroad? when we were talking, we did a section in the survey that asked about I don't know, social justice or whether or not you have faith in the criminal justice department, things like this. I would ask, do you guys in Romania have fake news? Do you guys know what that means? Does that translate? And they go, oh, absolutely. And we would ask these questions and we would get very similar responses from the Romanian citizens and the U.S. citizens. So what we were really trying to do is find out, what makes us similar, what similarities we have, where we could really drive connecting and branding points between the two citizens, but then also where there's a divide, and it's not necessarily a divide, but where we have discrepancy between responses. We really didn't see too much of that, but it was just a really interesting way to bring two groups of citizens together with data and really find out opinions, attitudes about these groups of people, and more similar than different, I would say. That's what we were finding.
Wonderful. And Mr. Ambassador, perhaps if I could just ask you to give a top line before we delve into some of the more specific issues about what you saw from the survey data and anything that surprised you.
I will start with saying that this was important from the perspective of trying to understand better the relationship between our two states in terms of society interaction. Because you can have a wonderful, let's say, diplomatic dialogue between countries, you can have strategic relationships, you can have common interest in terms of commerce and economics, but you must have this foundation better understood between the values that underpins such a relationship. And that was, I think, the main motive that uh, generated this, I will say, creative and innovative idea to have a comparative analysis on the reactions, the perceptions, the attitudes of two societies, of two countries that are allies, that are sharing in common many challenges. And to my sincere, not necessarily surprise, but in a certain way, let's say, positive feeling, I noticed that we share values in common, like values related to democracy, freedom of the media, security concerns, values related to the role of the military in projecting stability, values related to the interaction between the two economies and commerce. So this generates, I think, a better understanding of the solid foundation between two allies in NATO and a strong partnership that we have developed together between Romania and US.
Thank you for that. I think that's so important as well. So,
Yes.
here in the United States, of course, we have a very strong military relationship, diplomatic, political relationship with Romania. Romania, a very important NATO ally, an ally of the United States. But there's a deeper element to our relationship, and it's these shared values, the same values that the United States was founded upon are values that Romanians share. And I think that this survey really helped to highlight that. One of the things that I thought was an important takeaway from this data that, for the United States, I think is a really wonderful story is the incredibly positive way that Romanians view the U.S. So the survey data found that 79% of Romanians surveyed stated that they had a positive feeling towards the U.S. This is different, I think, than even in some of our other close allies within Europe. And so if I could ask, perhaps you, Mr. Ambassador, what do you attribute this feeling within the Romanian public to?
I think it's history from the very beginning in terms of our relationship. Let's not forget that an American president was involved in the unification of Romania after First World War. Then the fact that even under communism, the Romanian population, and that's very interesting, viewed America as a beacon of liberty, as a model, and despite the ideological differences at the state level, official level, the population really looked upon America as a model. And then, of course, the fall of communism with the American role in this respect. And by the way, we celebrate now 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism in Central and Eastern Europe. And really, this is a reason, I believe, strongly for the fact that Romanians really in terms of 80% of the population view America as a good friend, a good and trusted ally. And then of course the evolution afterwards towards alliances, partnership, security concerns in common, common perceptions of threats between the two countries in similar let's say, perception, for example, regarding the Russian threat, the counter-terrorism aspects related to our liberties and our security. So many things in common.
I think, one question that I might have to follow up on this discussion, if we're talking about the security sphere, that there's broad support in Romania also from the data for hosting American forces in your country. So
yes,
3/4 of Romanians support this. And the Black Sea region, as you correctly point out, important in the United States, but it's also now increasingly an area of contestation after
yes.
Russia's annexation of Crimea. They've continued, I think, to pour troops and material and weapons into the region and to the Black Sea region. And so I would say, how would the presence of U.S. forces within your country, and of course we've had forces in your country, really for the past few years, how would that improve the security situation in Romania?
Well, indeed, we have, first of all, one of the main common strategic projects between our countries is the missile defense shield deployed in Romania. This is very important for our security and for the security of the southern part of NATO in Europe against ballistic missile threats. And it has improved security, and there's this perception that really among Romanians that this is an addition plus towards our security. You have also presence at the Black Sea at one of our bases there, the Kogalnicianu base, used for the rotation of troops towards Afghanistan. Again, this presence really, and not only I will say in Romania, but in general with your involvement in Central and Eastern Europe, the so-called eastern flank of NATO, with this European deterrence initiative, I think this has created a more solid environment of deterrence, especially after events that took place in Crimea and the Black Sea. But the Romanian population perception with respect to our military cooperation is very important because, of course, this is a sensitive area, always in relationship between two governments and two countries, and to have such solid support, popular support for such a cooperation really generates an environment for further deepening this cooperation.
Thank you. And Mr. Lloyd, if I could drill down a bit more on some data within the survey. So Romania, of course, one of the NATO countries that spends 2% of GDP on defense. Romania has committed a large number of troops, I believe just under 700, to the Resolute Support Mission that's ongoing in Afghanistan to train and advise Afghan security forces. And so did the survey detail any impact that this commitment had on U.S. public opinion, the willingness of Romanian troops to go with the United States hand in hand in tough places like Afghanistan?
Absolutely. The problem is the way that we presented the data is we wanted to give the idea if an American understood that, if they knew that, because at the time we weren't too certain that Americans knew that our U.S. soldiers were fighting side by side with Romanian soldiers in Afghanistan.
Right.
So we needed to present that data to them first, actually. We needed to ask, if you knew this, what would your perception of Romania as a country, what would it be? And really, we presented a litany of issues like this with soldiers, with security aspects, free market economy, things like this. And really what we found is Romanians, I believe that the aspects of the central kind of eastern location and geography that Romania, where it's located, and it being a romantic kind of forward-facing country of free market. This isn't something that's looking to go back to a communist regime or a socialist economy or something like this, which in America we're actually seeing our millennials saying this. So this is something where we have these type of groups of support among Americans, a vast majority of Americans who say, if I knew these things about Romanians, I'd be thrilled to have lunch with them, have a beer with them, whatever it might be. We would present different aspects, visa free or something. We would ask different type of aspects of what we would really appreciate, and aspects that we knew that Romanians were actually facilitating at that moment. So it wasn't a stretch. It wasn't if they were to do this and some far off theoretical example. No, these are factual examples of what Romanians are doing, and a majority of Americans are saying we'd love that. We would love to hear this information. We would love to know this about these citizens.
Great, thank you. I think it was striking for me when I was looking at the survey data that the survey found that both Americans and Romanians have an extremely low confidence in government, in political parties, and in the national legislature. So for the United States, of course, Congress, and for Romania, the parliament. And so this is a question perhaps for either or for both of you. What do you think this means for the future of our democracies, this sort of low confidence in government institutions? There are some which had high confidence in the United States. I think the Army was one of them that the survey found continues to have high confidence. But clearly, I think in politicians and sort of political organizations, there's really a low confidence amongst our publics.
I will say that one of my great surprises from this and good surprises from this research was the fact that although at a certain level of policy between our two governments related, for example, to visa waiver, the inclusion of Romania in the visa waiver program, although your government and your Congress didn't yet approve that because of the legislation in place, which is a bit controversial in my opinion. The public opinion of Americans would like to see Romania included in such a program because of those elements of let's say, compatibility among our people and values and perceptions about U.S. policies abroad, support for counterterrorism, low rate of overstay here in U.S. So it's a difference between what governments do and what the population wants. But apart from this, of course, we are democracies. We want more from our institutions, from our government. We are critical, and that's good in terms of the evolution.
And that democracy aspect, I think, would go to that number for me. It was we asked Romanians and Americans, the importance of living in a free vote democratic country, and while you still have low support for government officials or policy that's being made or the Washington D.C. swamp, you have a majority of Romanians and 3/4 of Americans that are saying that they value the democracy, the ability to go out and vote and have that kind of change, that change agent for government officials or something of the sort. So I think that that's very important as well to look at. If both of these aspects were low trust in government and a low respect for your democracy, then I think that would be problematic. But that's not what we're seeing in either country.
I think that's an excellent point coming from the survey. And since Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned a visa waiver, I thought perhaps it could be a good opportunity to discuss that with our audience. And so this survey found that actually, a majority of Americans are supportive of visa-free travel for U.S. allies. Of course, a number of our allies across the world and Europe in particular have a set amount of visa-free travel, 90 days. And so we here at the Heritage Foundation, of course, have been very supportive of Romania's inclusion in the visa waiver program. As you know, it provides many benefits to the United States and our allies, including enhanced security, economic growth, strengthened diplomatic ties. But can you describe, how this impacts the Romanian public's view of our alliance and the lack of inclusion, I think, of Romania, where many of your fellow neighbors and fellow U.S. allies are included in this program, and what you think this would mean, both diplomatically and also from a security standpoint, including Romania in the visa waiver.
I think it will be the last, let's say, step towards a complete strategic partnership, which is so good in all those areas: security, economic relations, cultural relations, and it will really enhance the interaction between our society, our elites, but also citizens that want to see both societies, both countries, and want to travel and want to invest in US on an easier basis. So I believe that together with Poland, for example, which is a main ally of ours in that region, I think we deserve, from various points of view, to be included in this visa waiver program because, uh, apart from the fact that your population supports this, it will add to the security, to the dynamic of trade between our countries a lot.
Yeah, I agree with everything that the ambassador said. I also would point out just again the geographical location, um, the strategic, I guess, military alliance that we have between the two countries. The fact that right now the head of the EU, I think, is sitting in as that
Yes,
transition
exactly.
already have. So right now, the EU headquarters is in Romania for all intents and purposes for those decision making processes. So I think the Americans have a good understanding of this alliance, and I think that they would have a greater understanding if they knew all the facts in it,
That's great.
or a greater approval or
Yes,
favorability if they have the
Brett
facts in it.
mentioned the
Yes.
EU. So we have the EU presidency of the European Union
Right.
Council right now. And one of our main objectives is right related to this importance that we attach to the transatlantic relationship. I mean, to see that we have a solid security and trade relationship between Europe and US, which is so important for a certain structure of security and stability in the world. And for 6 months, we have this presidency, and we're working hard to, let's say, put our capabilities, diplomatic capabilities, in the in for this objective to be attained.
Mr. Lloyd, would you mind? Could you talk a little bit about on the economic sphere? Were there areas of convergence or discord between how Americans view the economy and sort of government's role there versus Romanians, and sort of how you see that data playing out in the survey?
Yeah, sure. I think Americans had a little bit more confidence in future growth of the economy, or the idea that for a prolonged period of time, their family will be able to sustain that livelihood. So a family doesn't believe that necessarily the economy was going to crumble. And I'm not suggesting that Romanians thought that the economy was going to crumble by any stretch, but the amount of confidence, economic confidence, wasn't there, which is pretty wild because when we were looking at different factors of that right direction, wrong track of the country, something that you might think gives you a sense of the economic confidence. Um, you see very similar numbers between U.S. respondents and the Romanian respondents, and some of these factors, some of the economic factors, were a little less favorable or optimistic in Romania. I think that the ambassador could speak to that much better than I can. The one thing I've noticed, and I don't mean to overstep here, is when we were looking at some of our data, just as we have millennials that have their own ideas and are on Facebook and YouTube and might be thinking. I just saw some recent data out that 50% of millennials favor socialism, and just as we have young citizens with their own opinions, there's some Romanians that are born after 1989 and might not have the same opinion or outlooks towards a free market economy or to the West or to America as some of their older generation. And I'm just stating that based on the numbers of the younger population that I had seen.
Yeah, it was. I think this difference should be also accounted for in terms of our historic evolution in the last 30 to 40 years. The fact that dismantling a command economy after the fall of communism and embarking upon creating free markets, which is a very difficult process of transition. Private property generated a lot of hardships during this period, and because of that, you saw also in your study a certain inclination of Romanians to confer to the state a more significant role in terms of the economy. But those are nuances that are related to those different dynamics in terms of history and society. Similar in terms of the value attached finally to democracy and towards freedom of the market, which is the most important thing, is predominant.
Absolutely. I think, you definitely mentioned that there's an appetite in somewhat in the data for greater government control in areas as opposed to the United States and Romania. And do you think this is sort of a trending one way or the other over time? I don't know, perhaps this is outside of the survey, but do you think more Romanians are looking towards economic freedom to sort of build their future and give them additional prosperity, or do you think that that's stalled some?
I think this is an aspect related also to the economic crisis from 2008,
Right.
which affected a lot Europe, especially Central and Eastern Europe, and we were obliged then to really have a very strong policy for austerity, which had a social impact. But on the medium and the long term, I think economic freedom in terms of competitivity, markets, etc., are valued by Romanians as the only way forward.
Two other questions that are related. One is on, can you talk about sort of the 3Cs initiative, Mr. Ambassador? And then perhaps from Mr. Lloyd, can you talk about any data within the survey about business-to-business contacts, how those are viewed in the publics of both countries?
I think the 3Cs initiative is an excellent aspect of cooperation among countries from Central and Eastern Europe, let's say the eastern flank of Europe and NATO, from the Baltic Sea towards the Black Sea, in terms of further integration, connectivity, development of infrastructure, in order to, let's say, eliminate this difference, this discrepancy between the eastern part of Europe and the western part of Europe in terms of EU, but also generating a good economic connectivity with US in terms of energy, especially, and
Yes.
Infrastructure. And I think this is a good process. It's ongoing now. Slovenia, it's the new leader of this 3Cs initiative after Bucharest supported the last conference over there. And I think we can move forward and create here an area of excellent economic development and dynamism.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in terms of in going through some of this data, and I apologize, I still am pulling up demographics and different responses here while we speak. But in looking at kind of the business development aspects, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that if you were to ask Americans, are you okay with a business to business or trade agreements or whatever with a specific country, they're going to have to know information about that country. So while we're not able to necessarily say that this is the absolute best business to business trading partner we could have, once Americans hear these facts, then they believe that this is something. So what I think that it is important, and it's something that it's tangible. It's something we're talking about right now, is growing these relations and kind of highlighting some of these facts, some of these. I don't want to say pro-American because they're also pro-Romanian, but these facts between the similarities between these two countries, and really kind of developing that trust. I think we've seen it a lot in the couple months that we've been speaking to this data, of where we see overlap and where we see businesses that are working with each other, and how well that's working. There's also probably a larger trust among there. It's not probably, there is, but there's a larger trust among Americans who know of Romania to be a business partner than of the EU as a whole. Well, that's because there's maybe different aspects of the EU which Americans don't know about, and that's still the unknown. And we get back to what Americans know versus what they don't know and what they feel comfortable with. But really, when we start talking about, and for most Americans, I will say, and the majority of Americans, when we start talking about fighting alongside America abroad, that pretty much is that we ask a litany of questions, but usually if you're fighting alongside Americans abroad, you have opted to fight alongside America and take alliance with America in those type of um, not war zones, but escalations, and some of the time war zones. That's one of the things that Americans look at and say, this is a country in which we could do business with. This is a country in which we should be trading with. These are people that are like-minded, and you're going to see that a lot more with a Romania than you are with a country maybe that's not so friendly or doesn't look towards America in such a sterling light.
Thank you. I just want to circle back to a couple other issues. And one of them is this trend in fake news, and I think an area of overlap that we saw within the data here between how Americans and Romanians view the news media. So in Romania, I think only 34% of people within the survey data believe the press is free or totally free. And so, how do you see this trending over time, and how do you see this comparing to the U.S. public's view about the role of the news media within the public debate and as an institution?
Well, again, we should look at the history of and the process towards democratization and reform that we undertook after 1989, after the fall of communism. And it was a difficult dimension in generating a vibrant civil society, media in time. After you had only the national television before 1989 and one or two newspaper. But it's very diverse now, lots of TV channels. Now it's a question of discerning quality, and I'm speaking here also about fake news from quantity, also trying to have a rational perspective on the strong influences that are projected in terms of our more powerful neighbors from the eastern part of the frontier, and this is valid for the entire European Union. And I'm really confident that there is great diversity, great dynamism in terms of the freedom of population to express their views and perceptions in the Romanian media right now.
Yeah, and I would just say for the Americans, I mean, when you have more Americans that distrust the news than trust the news, it's something that's a little jarring or shocking, or something that you have to realize that fake news, while it maybe gets looked at as a Twitter or hashtag or something like that, that might be a throwaway, the actual implication of that is problematic when you have more Americans that distrust the news. What we were finding, and it was similar in Romania and America, is that there was an agenda. There was an invested interest in the news organization who was relaying this news, and that was the problem. That it wasn't just looking objectively at a situation. It was money behind it from whoever owns the news source that might be wanting to paint a specific narrative, and so we saw that, and I think we saw that in both Romania and America, and I think the American, just speaking to the American data, is that the Americans are now able to kind of see through this unbiased opinion of a newscaster that's pretty biased. So I think it's a little more transparent nowadays.
One of the areas I thought that was interesting within the survey that I found is that a far higher percentage of Romanians, so 60%, saw the U.S. as having a positive image in the world. Americans, it was extremely low. I thought only 36% of Americans thought that we as Americans had a positive image overseas. And so I guess this is probably a question for both of you. You know, what does that mean? You know, how do you see that changing? Why do you think Americans, maybe for Mr. Lloyd, a fellow American, you know, have such a low opinion of U.S. Image abroad? And maybe from you, Mr. Ambassador, what is it about the U.S.'s role that you think that Romanians see as indispensable and extremely important?
Let me try to have an explanation which is based on, again, on geography and history. I mean, I think our view as a regional, let's say, country is based on the perceptions that we see about and understand about America in Central and Eastern Europe, which are mostly positive because of, again, America's role in the fall of communism and the liberation of this part of Europe from the Soviet, let's say, orbit. America, as a global player, probably have the population has a more diverse and nuanced approach to this perception. I don't know.
Yeah, I might actually go back to the news outlet portion of this when we're looking at the numbers, but it was fascinating. So we weren't asking whether or not in this particular question whether Romanians had a positive view of Americans. It was whether or not they believed that the broad international community had a favorable opinion, and we have 6 in 10 Romanians, a group of citizens that are already abroad, surrounded by other countries, asking them. 6 in 10 say that America's viewed positively, and we have over half of Americans that say that we're viewed negatively. I think we really focus on the news on what America is doing wrong, and I don't think that there's ever any focus on what is been doing right.
Ties back into the news discussion
exactly.
we just had.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I want to thank both you, Mr. Ambassador, and you, Mr. Lloyd, for this very interesting discussion and some incredibly interesting data that we'll have up alongside the video podcast here. And I also just want to say, I think, very powerful and important messages for the future of the Romanian-United States partnership. I have a lot of confidence in it and hope it continues to grow. And thank you all, our audience, for joining us this afternoon. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.